Good evening, everyone. My name is Juliane Campfield. I'm the director here at Deutsches Haus at NYU, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our last panel discussion in our series, The States We're in, a New Age of Transatlantic Relation. This panel discussion is about the topic of migration and art. Well, a lot has been said about migration recently. We've heard a lot about borders, walls, who can go where and how and who cannot. We're looking at this political topic from an artist, curators, cultural managers' point of view, talking with people who have moved or have moved even several times between cultures and languages and nations and are all very experienced about living in different contexts. These have all been voluntary moves, of course, but I think that will still provide us with some insight about the general question of migration and about the question, can art transcend these migration border wall questions? And we have 5 terrific people to address these questions. I'll start on the very left. We have Nathalie Anglès, the director of Residency Unlimited. We have the artist Andy Graydon, currently based in Boston, who used to live in Berlin. We have Silvia Fehrmann, die Leiterin des Künstlerprogramms Berlin, the head of the Artists in Berlin program, and we have Claudia Steinberg, the writer and journalist, and Stefan Falke, a New York-based photographer who's originally from Germany, moved to the States at some point, and Claudia is originally from Germany, and Silvia has mixed allegiances, but is currently based in Berlin and used to live also in New York and Buenos Aires. And I will provide you with more insight about their bio in a little bit. Just some thanks. I would like to thank the Transatlantic program of the Federal Republic of Germany that supports us with funds from the European Recovery Program of the Federal Ministry for Economy and Energy. For this particular states we're in series, and additional support for this program, for this very program, was provided by the DAAD, which is a wonderful organization, the German Academic Exchange Service, that supports our academically inclined programs. So thanks go to these 2 institutions, and of course also to the Deutsches Haus staff, especially to Sarah and Elena, our interns, to our photographer John, to our videographers, and to you for coming to our events. Thanks for your interest, your continued interest, and remember, you can also take German classes at Deutsches Haus. The holidays are coming up. If you want to learn better German, or if you want your loved ones to learn German or better German, send them a gift for a holiday term class. And you can, of course, also donate to Deutsches Haus. Ende des Jahres rufen alle auf nach Geldspenden. So if you feel so inclined, you find the information on our website. If you don't feel inclined, you're still welcome to Deutsches Haus anytime. All right, so now the bio information. Nathalie Anglès is co-founder and executive director of Residency Unlimited. She studied history and political science and is a graduate of École du Magasin International Curatorial Studies program in Grenoble. From 2000 till 2008, she worked at Location One as the director of the International Residency Program. This is how we met many moons ago. Before moving to New York in 2000, she worked in Paris at the Union Centrale des Arts Décoratifs, École des Beaux-Arts, and the American Center Sotheby's in London. In 2008, she received the title of Chevalier of the Order of Arts and Letters from the French government. Moving on to Stefan. German photographer Stefan Falke lives in New York City and works for international magazines, film studios, and corporate clients. He has published 2 books, Moko Jumbies, The Dancing Spirits of Trinidad, a photo essay about a still walking school in Trinidad, and La Frontera, Artists Along the US-Mexican Border, the result of an ongoing project for which he photographed over 200 artists who live and work on both sides of the 2,000-mile-long US-Mexican border. And we exhibited both the Frontera project and the Moko Jambi project here at Deutsches Haus several years ago, so you might already be familiar with his work without knowing it, because you only saw his pictures, and now you will hear him talk also about the Frontera project. So it might be a revisit, so to speak. His work has been exhibited internationally in galleries, photo festivals, and museums. Silvia Fehrmann is a literary scholar, translator, and cultural manager. In January of this year, she took on the role of head of the DAAD's Artists in Berlin program, one of the world's most renowned scholarship programs for artists working in the visual arts, literature, music, and film. She was formerly the deputy director of the Berlin-based Haus der Kulturen der Welt, which is a venue for contemporary arts and a forum for public discourse. Many of you are probably familiar with that institution as well. She's a spokesperson of the Rat für die Künste Berlin, an elected commission representing Berlin's cultural practitioners. She was born in Buenos Aires, where she worked at the Goethe Institute and taught at the university. Working in film and video, sound performances, and installations, Andy Graydon tracks the wayward lives of forms in the world, from morphogenesis to translation to decay. Interested in natural and social ecologies and the role of listening and the voice, his work engages structures of music such as scoring, improvisation, collective emergence, and community. He's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Maui, Hawaii. His work has been presented internationally at the New Museum, Participant Inc., New York, Berlinische Galerie, Berlin, the Frei Art Museum, Seattle, Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, Honolulu Museum of Art, Hawaii, Wrocław Media Arts Biennial, Poland, among others. He has been artist in residence at the MacDowell Colony, New Hampshire, and NKD, Norwegian Artists Center, Norway, and the Center for Computer Music, Brooklyn College. He received his MFA in radio, television, and film from Northwestern University. He lived and worked in Berlin from 2008 to 2014 and taught sound art and photography at NYU Berlin from 2012 to 2014. It's a terrific place, NYU Berlin. If you have a chance, send your kids there or your grandchildren. Oh, go yourself. Claudia Steinberg left Cologne for New York in 1980, originally planning to stay for a year. Look what happened. Her decision to remain in New York was greatly influenced by her friendships and work relationships with German writers and artists who had fled Nazi Germany. When the wall between East and West Germany fell, long-standing political beliefs were put into question. In the last decade, she has developed a keen interest in the US-Mexican border. As a journalist, she grew fascinated with the complex and untamable town of Tijuana, which became the subject of several articles. She writes for Taz, Die Zeit, Vogue, Tank Magazine, and The Fabulist, among other publications. Now we'll segue into the individual presentations, and we'll start with Silvia, then Stefan, then Nathalie, and then Andy, and then please welcome me, not welcome me, join me, welcome me, yes. It's been that kind of week. It's only Tuesday, but I'm already long gone. But please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our wonderful panelists, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Juliane, for your kind presentation and kind invitation. I welcome this opportunity to step out of the daily institutional life in Berlin and share some reflections with you on what we are doing, or maybe on what ought to be done in this situation we're living. Given the latest developments, I think I do not need to stress that migration, as we are seeing it now, is the result of growing economic inequality in the context of globalization. It is a different kind of migration the one that built up countries like Argentina and the United States. And it might be redundant to mention this, but those migrants that created these countries, Argentina and the US, were, as poor as they were, driven by hope, or they were promised a future. And today's migrants are driven by despair, and our democracies are not welcoming them with the open arms they have envisioned. And that's a crucial difference in terms of what communities we can build out of this situation. I might not need to picture the situation of militarized borders, xenophobic social relations, and even geographies between North and South. I think all that is very known in these days. And I think I do not need to mention either that Germany has a long and complex reluctance to come to terms with the fact of it being a migration country for the last 50 or 60 years. There has been an unexpected turn of events that you also are very aware of when Angela Merkel did not close the borders to the refugee caravan. The right-wing people are saying she opened them, but the only thing she did is not close them. And you may have heard of the wave of solidarity German citizens developed to welcome the newcomers at that time, around 2015, as well as the xenophobic turn we have been experiencing in the last years. These are all well-known notions to all of you, I think, but I would like to have a look at the artistic and institutional responses to such developments, as I have experienced them in my practice in Germany in the recent years, and Juliana has mentioned the institution I've been working on. I would like to sketch 3 points of departure. I'm borrowing from T.J. Demos' seminar work, The Migrant Image. The first point of departure is asking what new strategies are artists inventing to intervene in the current situation. And here I would like to mention 2 works that you can check online, and it's an interesting way of entering into this discussion. One is the work by Forensic Architecture, a collective of architects and artists based at Goldsmiths in London that defines itself as a research agency. They have had an intervention in the last Documenta in Kassel, you know, this big, very important event of contemporary art that takes place every 5 years. They were invited by an alliance of civil society actors and an art institution like HKW to do research on a xenophobic murder that occurred in Kassel, in the city, which is the venue of Documenta. A murder in the context of the political murders committed by the NSU, the first appearance of a right-wing extremist terrorist group that had been for a long time ignored by the state. And you can check online, if you go in Google Forensic Architecture, you can see the material they have developed, the research they have developed, and the presentation with visual strategies. And what they have produced is a piece of evidence that has been discussed even in judicial forums. And what I like to stress here is one comment Weissmann, one of the heads behind forensic architecture, did in the context of Documenta. And I'm quoting, "Art has been very good in the last decades in problematizing the notion of truth, insisting that narratives are more complex than we are told, that art is about doubt." And I'm very much indebted to this idea that art is about doubt. And Weissmann is now pointing that we need another possibility of art, one that can confront doubt, that uses aesthetic techniques in order to interrogate. And he goes on, "We think that what cultural institutions can and should be doing today is to be clear about the fact that an art exhibition is not only about beauty, but it's also about the truth." This is a way to put it, and I would like to refer to the work of Banu Cenetoglu, a Turkish conceptual artist who has been a grant holder by DAAD, who has spent 16 years of her life making the world aware of the migrant situation through displaying the list. And the list is a list of the 34,361 documented deaths occurred in the Mediterranean Sea. This list has appeared in Greece, Bulgaria, the US, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Turkey, and now the UK. and has been distributed in a variety of forms, poster campaigns in railway stations, printed in newspapers, etc. There is such a particular power to this list, presented as a physical object, that its last iterance at the Liverpool Biennial has been destroyed by right-wing populists. The second question I would like or point of departure I would like to make is an issue that might be relevant for the work on La Frontera, which is the question of how to represent artistically the life that is banned from political representation. Here I would refer to the work of Teresa Margolies, a Mexican artist awarded with the DAAD residence grant. Last year she engaged with forced migration in Venezuela at the border with Colombia. And in several actions she hired Venezuelans to perform things they do in their daily life. For instance, carry stones, carry objects from one side of the other frontier to the other, heavy merchandise. She hired the migrants to knit their narratives into fabrics stained by the local soil, or she bought used sweat-stained T-shirts from them. During all these events, the manual labor was remunerated and accompanied by conversations, giving jobs to people in need. As you may see, what she created is a relation, in this case a relation of exchange with the refugees, that counteracts the objectification taking place each time you take a picture. And this point of creating relationships and building up a bond is very crucial for many of the artists working in that field, and I'm sure you're going to mention this as well. The third point I would like to make finally, or the question I would like to address is if these strategies I've been mentioning, the strategy of producing a truth in or through artistic exhibitions, and the strategy of creating relationships through artistic practice, how does this reconfiguration of art's connection to politics impact in the German society at this moment? Is there the possibility to build a positional force out of these engagements that stands for plurality and openness and against racism? I would like to mention two projects. One is Berlin Mondiale, a partnership between 27 cultural institutions in Berlin working in tandems with refugee shelters for the last 3 years. We have been building this up before the the highest point of immigration in 2015, so we started in 2013. And this has created a network of solidarity that has been very important when the situation got more complicated and we needed to organize against the extreme right. The other collaboration I would like to mention is choreographer Sascha Walz, who has just been here at the DAM some weeks ago. She has launched a series of conversations between artists, journalists, human rights activists, including, of course, newcomers, refugees, on the issue of the strategies we do have at our disposal to exert political influence. And what she has created, as many other artists have done in the context of Berlin Mondiale, is a new community of practice. A new community of practice that allows to learn and to organize together. All these efforts have led to the Berlin Declaration of the Many that you can also check online. That is an initiative of more than 150 art institutions that are taking a stance against the right-wing attack on the freedom of art. And if you read their presentation, you may not hear the term migration in this project. And this is a way of stating that migration is the new normality. We don't need to stress it. The problem we have is to organize hope together against this right-wing dream of homogeneity that has never existed. Yeah, that's my point.
Hi, my name is Stefan Falke. I'm a professional photographer. I work for magazines and I just earn my living taking pictures, but I always work on my own private projects, so to speak, and I usually take years and years and years to finish. And then I become books and I move on to the next project. This one I haven't found an end yet. Been working on this for 10 years. It's about artists who live right on the US-Mexican border. They, in order to be my project, they have to live like right on the border, like in one of the cities that are not, that physically are on the border, like Tijuana or Mexicali or Calexico or El Paso and so on. And this whole migration discussion has kind of caught up with me, because in the beginning it wasn't about migration at all. It was about us looking at certain locations in the world in a negative way for a certain period of time until we just lose interest in them. My first idea was to go to Palestine and Israel, where you have kind of the same problem. If you see stone throwing Palestinians, sorry, for a certain period of time, let's say 5 years, then that's all you have in your head. That's what you think about that place. And so 10 years ago was more about violence, and every journalist who would go to the border would want to report about the crime that was rampant there back then, and still is actually. But that's only like a very small part of the story. So everybody, and it's a political tool to do this, to make certain areas look like real bad, so you stay away from them, and I can militarize them, and so on. So today is a good example. If you watch TV today or yesterday, you see nothing but masses of people storming the Mexican border in Tijuana, and they show it over and over and over and over again, and that is basically what you think of that place. You have no other image. It's not even your fault. You have no other image. You see nothing of Tijuana. You have no idea what that is. Tijuana is a place that was 1.8 million people, has an extremely modern center. It has more art institutions than any place I know besides New York. Needless to say, it's like one of the. If I wouldn't live in New York, I would probably live in Tijuana. One of the most interesting places I have seen in my life, and I've been in many places. So my point was simply like to go there and see if there's another side of the coin, which is the cultural side, and what I've found, which I'm as brainwashed as anybody else. I had to go and see. So the extreme vibrant cultural life and the many talents that live along the border. The border is a 2,000-mile long almost country, which in my opinion is 50 miles to the left and 50 miles to the right, so it's like a 100-mile wide, 2,000-mile long country, which has a fence in the middle, which only works, it kind of hardly works, especially not in the cultural sense. It's a binational country. I call it La Frontera, and many people who live there call it La Frontera. Some people even didn't want to tell me what side of the fence they were born, because they didn't want to be in that category. They said, I'm from La Frontera. And one artist once told me that, like, the US side doesn't have Washington and we don't have Mexico City. We have only ourselves, and that's unbelievably true. I mean, the nations don't really care about that area unless they can militarize it and pour money into so-called security or whatever. I mean, it's a funny picture to talk about security. There's a fence wherever they want to build one, and they just stop. This is all artwork, by the way. This is Teresa Fernandez, who paints the border itself. But my point also was not just to find artists who work on the border. I just wanted to find artists who live on the border. I didn't even care what they did, or if they were famous or not, known or not. Most are not known. Some are world famous. But my point was simply to show that there's a total different reality to what we know about those places. And I think only this way, I mean, the other side has to be reported too. We have to see the pictures that are on CNN right now, but not only. And I believe if we focus a little bit more on the cultural side of places, we will create an interest in them. If I see stone throwing and tear gassed people all day long for, let's say, 5 years. Let's say you have a violent demonstration in New York City every month, just one day. And that's all the world gets to see about New York City. What would people think about New York City? That's all they know about it. This is a very violent place where they have one protest after another. So that's kind of the same with the border. I mean, there's 5 or 7% of mayhem, and the rest is like a highly interesting cultural zone that I just can't, take my eyes off. I mean, this is, again, I've traveled the world many times over, but this is the most fantastic area I've ever seen. So I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking Mexican border. I'm probably the only crazy person who can't wait to get back there. And then I'm a migrant. I migrated inside Germany for a while. I've lived in 5 different cities. Art and, what was the title? Art and Migration. I mean, if I personalize that, the artist wakes up and wants to migrate. At least most artists I know, I said that earlier, they don't want to live where they live. Never. When I moved to New York, I thought this is it. I need to be in New York, and then you're in New York, you want to be somewhere else. So I kept traveling while I even lived in New York. Although I had all the stimulation I need here, but I hardly take any pictures in New York. It's always somewhere else, So the migration is already was in my head, when I got born. So I couldn't wait to get out of my hometown, moved to 4 different cities, and kind of rotated out of the country and ended up in New York. 1 year was the plan, like with Claudia, and that was in '85. And 10 years later, things didn't work out the way I thought they would work out. I thought they needed me here, but that wasn't the case. Moved back to Germany, where all of a sudden I was needed, and got fairly successful, and moved back to New York because now I was so used to New York. And that was in 2002, so I've been here continuously since 2002, and I would probably live in Detroit or Tijuana right now if I hadn't gotten married a year ago. So now migration is over. But I love it, don't get me wrong. But I'm always thinking about places like Tijuana or Detroit or whatever, all these places that still have something to offer that other places don't. They are being built and mostly through the arts. So I think that's enough from me. I could go on and on and on. These are just a few samples of 200 artists I have photographs. I think I'm showing 20 or 25 here. So thank you.
I'm not quite, is it working? Yes. So thank you for having me here. I'm very interested in artist residencies, and I have been for a long time. And professionally, I've worked in different artist residency contexts, whether it's in Paris or in New York. And then in 2009, I founded this organization called Residency Unlimited. The word unlimited might seem a little bit pretentious, but New York is a city of incredible opportunity, and I thought it would be interesting to create a residency program that was a little bit different from the conventional idea of a residency, which is, studios, which are basically it's about providing space to artists where they can, and that's a fantastic thing to do. But in New York, space is very expensive. And also, there's so many different opportunities in New York that I thought it would be interesting to develop a system where we have a space, but space is not the prime kind of factor. What we really do is to provide a very tailored, customized experience for artists. Also, we partner with many different local organizations. By partnering, we can join forces and have access to resources that we wouldn't be able to as a small organization. So our partners are, we work with Kings County Center Hospital, we work with Visual Aids, we work with Montclair University, and I'm going to focus more specifically on a new program that we are part of, a coalition which is called the New York City Safe, I always get the name wrong. New York City Artist Safe Haven Prototype, which is a program that provides housing, support, and career development to international artists who are at risk of political, gender, or religious persecution, who need a respite from a dangerous situation, who are from conflict regions anywhere in the world, or from countries where there is a repressive regime that limits their freedom of expression. And so in order, we are part of Residency Unlimited is part of this coalition called the New York City Artist Safe Haven Prototype, which brings together Westbeth. Westbeth is a it's a historical residency studio program in New York City that offers living and work conditions, exceptional studio space in the West Village. The other member is Artist Freedom Initiative, AFI, which is a nonprofit organization that is comprised of immigration and human rights attorneys who provide free immigration representation and resettlement assistance to at-risk artists or political refugees. There's a difference between being at risk and being a refugee. Being at risk means that you have to leave your country, but you can hopefully go back. And if you're a political refugee, it's usually very difficult to go back. So artists generally, or artists or whoever is in that situation, they don't want to be political refugees. It's not a status that they're looking for by any means. The Westbeth Residency Unlimited, Artist Freedom Initiative, and another organization called Artist Safety Net, which is an international volunteer network providing case management for threatened artists and cultural workers. So it's a very interesting program because we started 2 years ago, and now we are, Westbeth is giving us 2 studios, and we hope to expand the program to 6 studios. But one of these studios is actually for a writer, currently a writer from Nigeria, and PEN America has developed, so PEN America is also as a new partner for the writers at risk, and at Residency Unlimited, we work with visual artists. So the current artist is a Syrian artist called Rashwan Abdelkadi. Last year we worked with an Iranian artist called Hari Nasiri, and they basically can stay for a year in this situation, because when an artist comes under these conditions, they need to have a structure around them that will help them both psychologically, from a legal standpoint, and then as an artist, Residency Unlimited, through our customized support, we can offer them career development opportunities. So one thing that we do, which is a very important part of our program, is that we provide very enhanced network support. So this year, for example, we invited 200 art professionals to meet the artists, and we match each meeting. It's a lot of administrative work. Julianne has very kindly come a couple of times to meet the German artists, but Swiss and Austrian as well. And so as a residency program, we work with a lot of international artists and also local artists, but for the time being mainly international. And one thing that we have noticed in the current political climate is that even artists from Western countries are having, are being interrogated, let's say, when they come in, which has never happened before. We work with artists from Cuba, we work with artists from Africa, we work with a wide range of artists from geographical areas. We had 2 artists from Cuba whose visas were unfortunately denied, entrance visas denied this year, and this has never happened before. So, and I'm very, it's, as you were saying, and as we all know, this is such a wide topic, but I thought I would focus more on this new program that we created 2 years ago, and that stemmed from, we had a symposium in 2011 at the Goethe Institute at the Wyoming building, which was focused on artists in residency in conflict areas. And I have to say that this program, the New York Safe Haven Artist Prototype, is the brainchild of Todd Lester. I don't know if any of you know Todd, but he was the founder of Freedom Initiative, and he was one of the first to come up with this idea as residencies as safe havens for artists. So Freedom Initiative basically built all of these, or were not built, but was partnering with different artist residencies all over the world, RU being one of them, where we could host artists who were in political difficulty. And there's still much to do at that level, and our program is really small. We received a grant from the Rubin Foundation to start this program, but we would like to, and New York is, the ICORN affiliation is very interesting. And ICORN is very, very active at that level. But I will connect you to Todd, because I think you'll have a lot of things to say to each other. And there we go.
I am an artist who, well, you heard my bio. I work a lot with media, but also performance, and I'm interested in the structures of music quite a bit. I'm originally from Hawaii, and I've moved quite a lot within the United States. So from Maui, Hawaii, where I was born and raised, where these images were taken, to Seattle and Chicago, and then in New York, and then from New York, had the opportunity to move to Berlin in 2008. I think partly from that experience in growing up in an archipelago of islands, this idea of border is very interesting to me, but it oftentimes has to do with a kind of a coastal enclosing border more than a sort of a competitive force against force border. And so a lot of that, and thinking about isolation and the way different isolations work out, ends up with me doing a lot of work with the way that the way that you might say, the way that imagination is kind of inhabited, and the way that structures of the imagination are used to create the materials of the real that we actually are working with every day. And I hope that this is what I'm aiming towards when I talk about Berlin, or I hope it's clear that that's what I'm talking about when I talk about my studio space. But so that interest has led me to a couple of different kinds of projects, including following the native Hawaiian bat populations in the island of Maui, where I'm from, in a film that I did in 2017, or thinking about the way that the sound of a speaking voice shapes the architecture, as well as the kind of narrative flow of a space and a place, or the way that a cultural institution or a museum forms the cultural imaginary of the objects that it represents. But moving quickly, hopefully, on to my studio space, when I first moved to Berlin, very quickly was given the opportunity to work in a space on Leipziger Straße 66, which is right at the Stadtmitte, right in the middle of Berlin's Mitte, on this east-west running street, Leipziger Straße, that ends up in Leipziger Platz, which is more or less a gateway into Potsdamer Platz. And it's a fascinating spot. It's where the Star is. That's where my studio was. And then I spent a long time working at this building here. That's actually, this is the studio space right here. This is the corner. Leipziger Straße goes down there. All of the buildings on both sides going along that way are one sort of through composed neighborhood, commercial and residential program that had been designed in the DDR to be right alongside, you can see just a couple of blocks south of the studios, Checkpoint Charlie. So this neighborhood was very much involved in what happened with the Berlin Wall, but I was arriving in 2008, 20 years after the architectural fact had dissolved, so there wasn't the kind of barrier like a frontera, like per se. Instead, what I thought was so, I want to say intriguing, although what was so kind of strange and hard for me to get my head around coming from New York, was that you were faced with a bunch of turbulences that you could feel very strongly, but for myself as an Auslander, I couldn't read them effectively. I couldn't understand them. I didn't understand why the neighborhood, why that studio space, which whenever I would go there every day, I kept telling myself this is a bit like having a studio in Tarkovsky's Solaris, is here. Why am I allowed to have this incredibly cheap studio space with a group of artists who are here for the long term, who don't feel like they're about to be displaced, in this area that hasn't quite figured itself out? And I won't try to parse all of the different ways in which the neighborhood confused me, except to say that some of the most expensive real estate in the city is directly behind the camera here. And then if you continue down Charlottenstrasse here, you will again hit Checkpoint Charlie. And if you take a right, you will head down to Potsdamer Platz. But that I thought that I should look into it. And from this began a several years process of trying to sort of decode the city. And I said, well, I want to make a film about Berlin. And very rightly, most of the Berliners that I was speaking to said, yeah, no, you're not really qualified to do that. But I found that one of the key works that helped me figure this out was a monograph by Alan Balfour called Berlin, the Politics of Order, which used the space of Leipziger Platz, this Achteck, this 8-sided Platz, which is pictured in all of these images, but at different stages of different master plans in the history of Berlin. But on the right, you can actually see the structure of this 8-sided Platz. It uses that one square as the key to looking at the politics of architectural projection, or architecture as a projection of power, from the 1700s in Berlin up to the fall of the Berlin Wall. That became very interesting to me because one of the things that it was very interesting that the book was keen on explaining is that it wasn't about the buildings; it was about the projection. It's about projecting and the buildings are the kind of blunt object of this imaginal force that is the architecture. What did I do? I ended up making a film out of this, and it was very clear to me that if the film was going to be effective for me and for the work that I was doing, it should not be about my findings or my answers. It should try to stage the bumbling, ignorant falling around through the area, and how that was, on one hand, a productive force on its own, but on the other hand, what a tremendous sense of sort of ethical, how being woven within the ethical fabric of being within an urban environment, being within a community, and how important it was to face that with every expression that you had. And so as artists, you're so often focused on expression. That's presumably what you do. But in fact, what seems to be the most important is to be responsible to the kind of place building that you are doing with your life as an artist. That was something that I think maybe I can talk about later, the way in which I found the city and my transition into Germany and then back to the United States was something that I carried with me. So the piece, more images of the Akteek. The film that I ended up making was a kind of experimental narrative piece that follows then the person who's sort of the stand-in for myself, I suppose, was an improvising guitarist that I knew named Takeshi Nishimoto, who plays a designer who is visiting the city, visiting Berlin from Tokyo. As he's walking around through, he's going on a tourist itinerary through Berlin, he receives a call from a Korean science fiction movie company to build a 3D model of a spaceship for an upcoming film. So we get essentially two parallel tracks. We get a sort of a narrative conversation track in which he's discussing this ill-fated 3D model of a spaceship that's going to represent this sort of post-apocalyptic future of mankind. On the other hand, he is walking through different facets of the transitions that the city has gone through. So what I would want to do next is just show you 3-4 minutes of that piece that drop you into the first third of the piece, where he's sort of first getting an assignment and puzzling over an assignment, and then moving into one of his early conversations with his producer.
宇宙船キラキラと光る煙の中より悠然と現れた宇宙船は怖いくらいに美しかった。新しくとてつもなくスレンダーで無限な力を秘める。ほとんど見えない黒、そぎ落とされた精悍なフォルム、一つずつのタイトな表面とディテール、宇宙空間での百獣の王、システムの中をスライドする小型船の軍勢と1000人の人々を引き連れたダークな針、次の星へ向かって、そして栄光へ、歴史の中へ。
Alt oder modern, schön oder hässlich, Architektur spiegelt die Geschichte und verändert sich mit ihr. Berlin ist immer eine Stadt der Kontraste. Gerade deshalb ist sie auch wieder eine begehrte Kulisse für Filmproduktionen geworden. Hier finden Regisseure die unterschiedlichsten Drehorte. Hollywood macht aus der Karl-Marx-Allee Moskau, verlegt den Gendarmenmarkt nach London und durch das Gestänge der Eisenbahnbrücke hier am Bahnhof Friedrichstraße entkommen halsbrecherisch klettern CIA-Agenten ihren Verfolgern, zumindest auf der Leinwand.
タイトにするってことについてはちょっと細身で黒にするってことについては問題ないです。テクスチャーやりすぎですか？多分波型ですね。あ、波ではないのですね。鱗のような魚ではなく蛇の鱗。ありがとうございます。アンテナです。はい。指です。そうです。暗闇へと吸い込まれる。もっとですか？もっと長く。船の大きさはただ、僕が思うに宇宙船は大きくなければなりません。もっと大きくコロニーのためです。初めは宇宙船でした。そして今は町です。それも2つの町ですね。はい。
Thanks.
Art and migration is a subject that is omnipresent right now, and often art is seen, in quote, a language shared between individuals, nations, and cultures, able to redeclare identities that have been lost or abandoned when people find new homes, as a project at the Tate Modern recently stated. And just this morning I read, by sheer coincidence, that indeed exiles from Europe in the 1930s collected American Indian masks to combat the feelings of isolation in their new country, sharing a minority status with those original inhabitants. Still, are we perhaps rather optimistic in the way art has the power to heal and comfort? So I'm just placing this into the room. Maybe you? Either one of you.
I would say it's entirely optimistic.
It is entirely, yes?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, you forgot.
I don't know. I would say that it feels entirely optimistic in that in a certain way, oftentimes it's a displacement that simply allows you to a different vantage onto something. I think it's interesting that it's a recurring kind of renegotiation what art's relationship historically, what art's relationship to activism is, and how sort of embedded in a sort of a formal world, and how embedded in a world of action and procedure that it needs to be. So, you know, in a way, my answer is coming from that, from this historical moment, in which I think there's a tremendous sense that if you're not engaged, you're part of the problem. But at the same time, I think part of that awakening is the sense that aestheticization is a kind of a distancing that can only be productive under certain circumstances, right? It can also be a kind of a palliative, or it can kind of be simply a displacement of convenience, right? Of sort of it's the wrong kind of imaginary, or it can be.
So you mean in an escapist sense, or?
Sure. Yeah. Or letting you feel like you have the right kind of control, right? Because you've seen it and it's taken a form, and yeah.
That makes you feel good. Yes. Yeah. To create, giving things a form, I guess. Anybody else? Something to say about that topic, or? Okay. So, to Nathalie, apropos of exiles, the word is now much more common than it was when the great migrations caused by World War II were underway. We now hear always of refugees and not of banishment, a word that puts the home country much further out of reach and makes the action of fleeing sound much more voluntary. It was self-understood that the people expelled from Europe would mourn their loss, partly due to our ignorance about the countries these current refugees come from. We don't think of that in those same terms. So the common misunderstanding is also that people don't want to return. And you have some experience with that, and what artists hope maybe to gain from a residency, but also what they perhaps hope to bring back to their country.
That's a very complex question, because I think it's very much on a case-to-case basis. But as you were saying about migration, the migration today is driven by despair, as opposed to previous generations where they came to this country. We're speaking about this country because this is where we live, at least for now. They were driven more by hope. So I think that's a very interesting distinction, which I hadn't kind of thought about, but which is really obvious. And so I'm not quite sure how to answer your question.
May I just interject?
Yeah, please.
I'm not 100% sure whether what I was referring to was not the people who came with the hope, but as Juliane explained in the beginning, that I met a lot of refugees from the 1930s and 40s, and they certainly didn't come with the idea of hope. They came because they had to. They had to run away. So I did not want to contrast this with the people who are leaving now. It's more that I find that perhaps because we have a much more complete understanding of the European world that these people came from than what we know about the Middle East, for example. And so that maybe, therefore, we don't, and that addresses Stefan's question too, like to show the people in their normal life environment, and that we have so little understanding of that. That's what I really meant to point out more. And because you said to me before that people, almost everybody wants to go back, and
I mean, at least the two visual artists that I've worked with within the framework of this program that we set up, they're not here. They're here because they have no other choice, basically. But really, they really want to be. One the Iranian artist that we worked with last year, Hadi. His father died when he was here, and he couldn't go back to Iran to be with his father as he was, passing. And the current artist, Rashwan, speaks with his mother very regularly on the phone, but these people can't go back. So taking it even outside of this context, artists, when they come to New York, and the residency is a very kind of particular moment in the life of an artist. You might have done, MacDowell is really the kind of the crème de la crème of the residency. But coming to New York, I think artists might have like false expectations of what the city can offer, and But I know many artists who've been in my program who come from, for example, Eastern Europe. They come and spend 2 months here, and they find it interesting, but they don't necessarily want to stay here. Actually, they really are very happy to go back, having experienced New York, because New York, artists, a lot of in the imaginary is, the art, the kind of the fantastic art center where their career is going to flourish. And New York is a really, actually, as we all know, whether it's from an artist point of view or from a non-for-profit point of view, it's a really tough city to be in. I mean, there are lots of great opportunities, but if an artist tells me that they would love to move here, I say, really, put the, how do you say, the brakes on. Thank you, because you don't want to cut the connections with your roots, and it's great to be able to come back, as you might be going back to Berlin, on a regular basis, but to actually just, think that your whole life as an artist will flourish if you move here is actually, I think, a really dangerous is maybe not the word, but it's not necessarily the right solution. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think for someone like Stefan, who's been here for a long time, but you've moved around a lot, you found your kind of place in New York, but it took,
and not necessarily as a safe haven, I would say.
Right. So anyway, sorry.
Can I react to the last? Yeah. You're pointing at the crucial element, which is I have to rephrase. Sorry, my English. I had given a thought to this idea. Is it fair to compare migration up to the 30s and 40s with the current situation? And I think it is certainly a difference if you arrive to a country like Argentina or the United States, where other migrants have been received, and migrants basically can expect to build up a future for their kids, or if you're arriving into a country like Germany or France or Italy or where everything is saying, and the public institutions, the laws, the society, we don't want you to stay here and to build anything. So if you think of Latinos arriving to Germany, to United States, like up to 5 years ago, they could expect to have a life as undocumented documented migrants and get illegal work, but get a work and have their kids getting into the system. What they are experiencing now, seeing images of people encaged, they are absolutely unwanted. And other migrants are reading that. Germany is full now of advertisement asking refugees to go back. And people living in Germany for decades feel they are unwanted too. So there is a change in the perspective and the offer of a future or not that is crucial.
I just want to say one thing, because regarding the institutions that are not in place, because you mentioned Kassel before in the documenta, and I had read, that was even in the New York Times, that there is an obelisk there that was created by an artist, I think, from the Arab world, that says something about, like, the world belongs to all of us, something like that. And it was celebrated as a peaceful and unifying symbol, and then there were, of course, right-wing protests against this artwork, and the city took it down. I mean, caved in. And I mean, there you see the weakness of these institutions. I just wanted to add that. But Stefan?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that. Most areas, Western so-called areas in the world, try to say right now, please don't come. You know, or if you come, you're not really welcomed, or you come and you stay a little and you go back. The thing is, they're still coming. And whatever we do, they're still coming. They just keep coming. And all of them know that they're not welcomed. It's not that they, like 10, 20, maybe 20, 30 years ago, people didn't really know much. But today, within the digital age, they know everything. They know every single risk that they take coming here. And you would think, like, especially crossing the Mexican border, people literally risk their lives. You know, I mean, there's a desert. There's 3,000 dead people in there. There's the Noran Desert. And that's the ones they found. There's far more. So, and they keep dying. It's not like, and everybody knows that. Everybody who comes knows that risk. So the question is, what do we do since none of this works? People are still coming. In Europe, right now, it's kind of quiet because we're not saving them anymore. We just let them drown. But they're coming, you know, so all that, none of it works, really, in terms of making them stay where they are. They just keep coming. So we have to kind of, we as societies, I guess we have to come up with new answers. This is all not working at all.
Well, certainly what Hillary Clinton recently said to Mrs. Merkel, that we have done our bit, I would not say is the right answer. I mean, if you describe the situation, yeah. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, the people still continue to risk their lives because their lives back there are so terrible that it's worth losing them. And the lives there are so terrible because of a system that that builds up our privileges in the Western world. So this is so connected and entangled, and so hard to get to grasp, to get in, and that's a very complicated point, that our privileges are bringing so many people to despair.
Yeah, and we hold on to them. So to Andy, you have stayed in many different countries, from your native Hawaii to Norway. Your film Vostok, the one that we saw, the the excerpt from, was made during a longer stay in Berlin and shows the city as an utterly strange space seen through the eyes of a Japanese man who designs a spaceship for some kind of TV production. That's what I, yeah, is that correct? Something even more alien than the space we are seeing and hearing. At one point, we are dropping out of the sky with Google Maps into a no man's land of construction sites and forbidding buildings. I was reminded of the Berlin-based Japanese author Yoko Tawada, who has written eloquently about her search for the undecipherable in foreign cities as an inspiration, about her pleasure of listening to the confusing rhythms and melodies of strange languages. To her, being a foreigner is an art in itself. So maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, sure, that rings very true. I'm also so kind of allergic to the exoticism that's sort of baked into that, right? This idea that, well, if I think about my students who came from NYU, from New York to come to NYU Berlin, I was teaching a sound art course, and I said to them, well, we have to do all these listening exercises in the city now because you're not good with the language yet, and you don't know what the bus horn sounds like when you hear it. You don't know the way, and these are sort of pushed away from you. They're distanced. They're a bit more musical for that reason, and that's the kind of thing that I think you're thinking of. That they can be aesthetic sort of categories until you can read them fully, and then you read them. You read them for their significance, as opposed to sort of experiencing their contours as a kind of topography and a cross section. So I was certainly fascinated with that and feeling that I think it got me hooked on being an expat if I wasn't already. By the same token, Berlin is not it's not a wonderful romantic place. It's very crusty. It's a wonderfully genuine city in that I was to be frank, I was one of the people that they want there, but it wasn't welcoming, right? And I found that to be a wonderful realization for an American to experience. And I also feel that, so we were talking a little bit about when you were mentioning you can't really recommend artists to come here for a career, and I thought, oh, that's very interesting, because I found the value of not considering my life as an artist as opposed to my career as an artist, and I really understood the real. I think I understood what the commitments were to that when I moved to Berlin. That it wasn't figuring something out. It was living according to my I don't even know what it is, reflexes, instincts, designs, but being within them, not in a way that was designed to produce a career or a series of work, but in the sort of inverse, that the work was helping to produce a life.
I was also thinking about the vulnerability. It's not necessarily related to Berlin, but in general, when you expose yourself to a new place and all the excitement that is in there. And that was another question I had to either one of you, like there is this Kantian idea of the citizen of the world, and it's more acutely important today than ever before. His vision of a world without borders and where nobody can claim the right to a piece of land, and whoever lives on it has the obligation of hospitality because the earth belongs to everyone. On the other hand, there's also something very exciting and wonderful about the specific cultural expressions that borders have created, and to make full use of that. I mean, this you do it as an artist.
Can I speak to that really quickly? Because it reminds me of just what that brings to mind. I hadn't thought of the Kantian background, but that brings to mind Edouard Glissant, the writer and philosopher from Martinique, who talks about creolization. And so let's say like the colonial history, or the colonial moment, the colonial piece of history that we are still certainly in, gave rise to a violent recombination and recontextualization of races, cultures, peoples. But given the fact that it has happened, he would identify that this creolization is an incredibly productive force and produced. I think he was also known for saying that he considers himself a citizen of the world. I think it's just interesting to sort of locate that voice next to Kant, right? It's a very different place from which to speak, but it's a very related expression, I think.
In the 1940s, Jacob Lawrence created his seminal Migration series, an epic collection of 60 images that, like the Stations of the Cross, illustrate the great march of African Americans from the rural south to the north. Today, artists like Tania Bruguera consider real-life interventions, like running an office in Corona, Queens, that helps immigrants to navigate their new home. Has migration changed art practice itself?
I think Tanya is actually now working. The Corona project has advanced a step further. She's working now. She was hired by the Department of Cultural Affairs to work in their immigration department. And we have a RU alum called Onyedika Shuka, who's born in Nigeria but US based. He is part of this program called PAIR, P-A-I-R. Don't ask me what it stands for, but I can describe it. It's a new program developed by the Department of Cultural Affairs, which places artists as agents of change within civic agencies. So Onyedika is working in the Department of Corrections, and the artists are paid. You know, it's work. It's at least a year-long program where they interact with the staff of the different civic agencies, whether it's Department of Immigration or the Department of Corrections. And so I think that, artists are being recognized not as these kinds of, romantic figures who are, alone in their garret. You say garret in English, or garret? Yes, thank you. But that they're actually, they should be engaged in the everyday world as engaged citizens, and that they can make a difference because of the way that, their creative thinking. So whether it's Tanya or Onyedika, they're working with, the staff of the civic agencies. And so this is all, residencies are, expanding the notion of residency. Residencies are now, Amtrak has a residency program. Yes, Facebook, right? Yes, corporations are developing residency programs. So, but bringing in, I think it's a very positive thing. Artists are being brought in as, the interlocutors who can really engage on an everyday basis. Without being kind of romanticized. I think it's a little bit what you were kind of, this idea that the artist is I don't know if that's what you were saying, but that's how I was kind of perceiving it, being kind of different. I mean, they are different. Are they different? I don't know, but they definitely have their own voice that they can bring into the everyday kind of world and be really agents of change at that level without being, and I find that very interesting, actually.
Super exciting to hear that. I did not know that. Yeah, that's really wonderful. Wonderful news. Okay. Okay. So, to Stefan, you have dealt with artists who resist the constraints that come with the labeling of displacement, refugee, border artist, etc. One might compare their refusal of being placed in the refugee niche with female artists who don't want to participate in all women exhibitions. Often the art from an embattled place may make no reference to the struggles going on there, like some of the murals of Ciudad Juarez, which are meant to repair the social fabric, bring joy, lift the quality of life, or they may transcend these subjects in totally unexpected ways.
Yeah, I met quite a few artists on the border who didn't want to be in that category, border artists. I mean, I have a website called borderartist.com, where all these 200 artists have little introductions and including my pictures of them. And some of them are like I have mixed feelings about that. Like they like to be presented, but they like that they're not quite sure if the border artist is because there's no art market on the border. So if you're from the border and you're presented as an artist, people already know, people who know what art, they know like, they come from a place where there's no market, there's no money, so now they want to break out there via this vehicle or something. So they're put into a certain drawer in a certain Schublade. So many of them don't want that because they want to break out by themselves. Lots of those artists migrate from the border to Los Angeles and maybe to New York. Los Angeles is usually the point of interest for an artist from the border, or Mexico City. So it's not always met with a positive reaction to be put into that category.
This is just, I know that Nathalie has that experience too with artists and
artists who are in New York, artists at risk, don't necessarily want to be pigeonholed as artists at risk because they want people to look at their work as an artist, not as an artist at risk. So it's an interesting, it's an important thing to take into consideration. So I think.
Quick one. Well, also, you hear the word border artist, or many people at least connect that with a certain kind of art. They think, that artist will probably deal in his or her pictures with violence or immigration or the border itself or whatever. And that's why I never made a point of what these artists really did. I actually usually didn't even know what they did before I met them, and then I would photograph them no matter what their art was or if I liked it or not. It wasn't about me finding what I like. That would have been dangerous for the project. So I found an astounding amount of artists on the border who in their art didn't deal with any of that. They were just artists, and I mean somehow in there, deep in their paintings or whatever, you would kind of feel where they're coming from, but that wasn't the point for them. And then others go to the fence and paint the fence or deal directly or depict violence or whatever. But not even half of them. I mean, probably far less than that. Especially the young ones. They just want to, and that's why they don't want to be in that category, because you already think you know their art by hearing, he's from the border. You already have an expectation.
Okay. So who has a question?
Silvia, you mentioned what I think you said was the declaration of many, and I'm just curious to find out more, but I think you said it was institutions, 150 institutions in Berlin. I'm just curious, how did this come about? Who organized it? What exactly was the declaration? How was it made public? What were the responses? Just give a few examples of the institutions that participated. I mean, obviously you did, but I'd just like to learn more about it, because I find, the question of the artists as the activists, cultural institutions as institutions of providing resistance. I think this is so much at the core of what we all think about now, that I think these kinds of initiatives are really crucial.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, I realized that the issue of migration is and the response to the newcomers arriving in 2015 is related to this network, because what happened back in 2013-14 when we started organizing these networks of art institutions and human rights organizations was completely new, was to bring art institutions that are public funded, that have a very comfortable life compared to the struggles you have in the United States to go on, that brought these institutions into connection with social activists and actors. And the first appearance of this way of organizing was a demonstration in May or June this year, where artists and art institutions asked people to take the streets under the motto of glamour against the right. And we were invited to use the gold colors and to use those tissues you use for accidents, this kind of aluminium foil, these blankets, these gold blankets, as a way to mark that the right wing is brown and dark and sad, and we are bringing bright colors against them. And that was a kind of artistic intervention, Glamour gegen Rechts. And this was the starting point of this movement of art institutions and art activists to create an organization to make a point, to say, well, the right wing is not only changing and trying to change the public discourse, but it's also going against the constitution, because the German constitution states that the freedom of art and science. And that point of the constitution was the entry point for art institutions, because you still keep your neutrality as a republican institution, but you have a constitutional point to say, well, stop. The freedom of art and the freedom of science in German has a constitutional rank, and we want to stick to that. And that's an organization that came out of this first solidarity with refugees. The institutions rank from the very big foundation for the Prussian heritage, which are the biggest museums, to little institutions on a communal level. And there are lots of theaters. Theaters are very important in this moment in Germany. And also theaters from Hamburg and Cologne, etc., have joined the force. And it's called Die Vielen.
Sorry, about the monument in Kassel that was taken down. How did did it happen very quickly?
No, it was a long discussion, and they took it down, and in the end, they took it down by a decision of communal parliament, the community parliament and municipal parliament, town hall, where the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats voted for the extreme right, but then they decided that it was too much, and they built up the monument at another place. So it was a failure and a defeat and horrible and a scandal, but in the end, they did, some kind of compromise.
Okay, I'll hand this to you and switch off the heat.
Thank you very much. This was extremely interesting. I would like if you could perhaps say something about still this artwork, The List, how this was presented, how this was done, because perhaps this is also an answer to the moderator's question at the beginning, is perhaps what is the impact of this art in this situation, the political impact. And you said, well, they were people against it, fighting against it. So it would be interesting to get some knowledge, some more information about The List and the reaction in public.
Well, Banu Cenetoglu has been working on this list for 16 years, since she was first confronted with the issue of people dying in the Mediterranean Sea when trying to cross it. So she got input from human rights organizations, and the list has been growing and growing in exponential terms. From the beginning, she was concerned with the way of presenting it into the public realm. So she started with little papers posted in ATM machines and these kind of interventions. And then when the work got bigger, and when she got more important, she got more institutional support. So I first came to know the work in Berlin when the Tagesspiegel, which is a big Berlin-based newspaper, published the list. And this is one of these alliances and coalitions that are working right now. So the Tagesspiegel gave the place for free and published the lists. And she has been doing different iterations in the public realm, for instance, big poster campaigns. At the European Parliament, she has recently presented it as a teppich, as a carpet. So European parliamentarians have to walk on the list. And the list is like an and the list is a name, date, place of death, and a lot of NNs, NN, death, in a way, but but the list. And in the Liverpool Biennial, it was like one of those memorials you have for the Vietnam War, so a list on, and that was attacked by right-wing people in Great Britain. And that marks that all these interventions have an impact because we are in the midst of a cultural war. So right-wing parties in Europe are very much concerned about the cultural realm and are addressing it also reactively.
Thank you. I thank the panelists for today's discussions. I want to make a comment. I think that you painted the picture of the way that we relate to migration very bleak. And I think it might be helping the forces that are against migration to paint it that bleak. And in some ways, I would expect art, if art is going to deal with the truth, to unravel that and not to fall in the game that is either migrant or native or non-migrant. I recently came from Sweden, and Sweden might be similar to Deutschland. In Sweden, there's a lot of people now that are against migration and a racist party as well, quite racist. But there are a lot of people that are for migration and to protect them, especially if it's a matter of what you call ensamkommande barn, just children on their own, or if it's depending on the type of migrant that's coming in. And if they are going to the Swedish north, where the communities are losing population, they are very much liked. And I wonder whether art is falling into, again, it's either or, these polar opposites, instead of helping us unravel that it's a much more complex reality. And we are not gonna let the propaganda that we are really anti make those that are really working for it disappear. So I wonder whether art is doing something there. Also, whether art is dealing with the complexity of migration. It's not black and white. It's maybe some of the people in the Swedish north, if too many migrants come, they might be afraid that the village people with 20 elderly are going to disappear or something is going to happen. And I wonder, beyond the institutional efforts at helping them and some happenings, whether art can be reflecting these other sides of migration. Yes, sorry, it was long and rough.
Yeah, well, I have mentioned this partnerships between art institutions and refugee shelters precisely because there were spaces of solidarity where stories were exchanged, where parties were done together, where workshops for kids have been done. So precisely this aim of creating a shared space for newcomers. And we have been insisting very much on using the term newcomers to open up a future. The right-wing parties are stronger in the eastern regions of Germany where there are less migrants and less newcomers. So where there is a very little contact zone, there is the highest xenophobia because there is no convivial experience in daily life that starts to create gray zones of sharing food. And, yeah. So gray zones can be developed by a shared action. And art institutions can help to create these shared action spaces.
I'm supposed to ask the questions, but I want to say something to that because I just met the founder of this interesting activist artist collective, the Center for Political Beauty in Germany. And they have done some very provocative work. And for example, one thing they did is that they kind of hijacked the letterhead and so on of the Ministry for Family Planning and claimed that this ministry was allowing so and so many children, hundreds of children from Syria to come in and facilitate adoptions. Yeah? And so many people, it was just to bring out exactly that a lot of people would want to do that, you know, and a lot of people signed up for it, and then it was a questionable end of the story that none of this, of course, then happened, you know, that was actually very painful. But it demonstrated, and it was meant to demonstrate, I mean, they didn't know beforehand, but it worked out that way, that a lot of people actually have a bigger heart than one might think. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think I understand what the gentleman said. Maybe we do sound a little bleak because migration is probably one of the motors of culture, if not the engine at all. Because look where we are. We are in New York City. That's what we want. Just another boring place without migration. You know, I mean, this place is as vibrant as it is because everybody comes from somewhere, and I experienced that on the border too. You might think that most artists I photographed are either from Mexico or from the US. That's far from the truth. I mean, especially one of the last stories come to mind where I photographed a gentleman from Haiti. There was hundreds of Haitian refugees showing up like a year ago, not a year ago, 2 years ago actually, on the border. Everybody was surprised because there's no people of color on the border. They don't exist. All of a sudden you have hundreds of people from Haiti showing up via Brazil and the whole route down to the Mexican border. And they used to just walk up to the border and ask for asylum, which was very easy for them until Obama closed the border for them 2 nights before Trump was elected. So a lot of them got stuck in Mexico. A cultural nation that they're really not kind of used to, and the Mexicans weren't used to them either. But they were extremely welcomed to Mexico. I remember when the first Haitian baby was born in Tijuana 2 years ago. There was a celebration all over the city. We have a Haitian baby here, you know, because it was such a and what I'm trying to say is that the many people are stuck at the border, and in a way it's like a positive thing because it creates an amazing cultural space of people from everywhere, and many of them like being stuck there. They all of a sudden they realize, I don't want to go to America anymore. This is good, you know. There's more than we think. So migration always has that positive effect, and it creates more than there is, and better usually, you know. Unfortunately, we get to see the negative pictures of migration because the politicians use that usually to, you know, and the media too, unfortunately, to guide us in the other way, you know. In order to spend money on militarization and whatnot. And that's a whole long story, but migration is good for culture everywhere. You know, look at Germany, Berlin. How boring would that be without, right?
I really feel like being in London. I've never been there.
It's very cosmopolitan.
So I've been to Mexico, but never to, that's my next destination.
I guess this is the end of the formal part of the conversation, and we can chat some more outside over a glass of wine, but let me thank our wonderful panelists for an intriguing and very multifaceted conversation, and we certainly got a lot of viewpoints and very different perspectives with a lot of overlap, but also interesting differences. So thank you so much, Stefan, Claudia, Silvia, Andy, and Nathalie for coming, making time in your busy schedule, especially you, Nathalie, with your big gala coming up tomorrow. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Silvia, for traveling all over the Transatlantic and from Boston and from Brooklyn and Chelsea. And thank you for our second to last, for attending our second to last event here at Deutsches Haus. Come back for more events and learn German if you dare. Have a great holiday season, and please join me in thanking them. Thank you.